Here today for this guided tour of Essential Cargo Explorations in Hand-Built Ceramic with artist Scott Leipski. I have to remember to project through my mask. We first met Scott in 2019 for our ceramic exhibition that year, and since then we have been trying to coordinate a show, and we're fortunate. And thank you for working with us on this show.
Absolutely.
And we're pleased to be able to present this today. And Scott comes to us from the Upper Peninsula, but you're originally from Texas?
I was born in Texas, but lived in Wisconsin most of my life.
Yeah. So honorary Upper Midwestern.
Yes, yes.
So thank you for being here today, and I think I am supposed to mention that this exhibit is supported in part by the Michigan Council of Arts and Cultural Affairs, so we thank them for bringing this show and also Passionate Reality to us today. So I'll turn it over to Scott. Scott, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and maybe how I began with ceramic. I was a retail salesman for 30 years, managing big box to small boutique stores, having anywhere from 350 employees to 12 employees. And one day I decided that I could no longer do that. It was just wearing me down. It was a very difficult life. Lots of sacrifice as far as personal time and holidays and trying to make people happy that maybe didn't deserve to be that happy. And so with the help and support of my significant others, they allowed me to leave my job and start exploring art. And I chose to do ceramics mostly because of the sculptural aspect. In fact, I was just having a conversation with some friends about why I chose sculpture, and I remember as a boy going to the Milwaukee Public Art Museum and seeing art on pedestals. And there was something about how a piece of work on a pedestal was treated versus a painting on the wall or a bunch of objects in a case. It's like a veneration, you know, it's separate, it has air, people walk around it and explore it, and it's just such a visceral experience. And I thought, that's where I'm going to start, whatever that start may be. And so my early work actually was difficult because it's very easy to say I'm going to be an artist, or even say I am an artist once you decide that you are. But the functional aspect of it, of actually making something that somebody wants to collect, is difficult. So I think many artists start by making work they think people want, because you want to sell your work or you know, get a collector. And that's a slippery slope because you're trying to please somebody else and you're not really pleasing yourself. But once the realization came that I was really making work for myself in what I wanted to do or what I wanted to say, it all became much easier. So, and then I also decided that I was going to work in ceramic. But very early on I realized I was not going to dedicate myself exclusively to ceramic. I was not going to be a purist. Not being classically trained, I've taken some courses, but I have no degree. I gave myself permission to use other materials. So like this chair, this piece is called Class Photo, and it reminds me very much of the childhood, you know, school photographs. Because you got somebody making a face, you got somebody looking at the ceiling, you know, you got the kid who's kind of the class pet that's right in front of and smiling and looking at the camera. You know, it kind of embodied that. And then exploring new surfaces, I use a very non-traditional ceramic surface quite frequently, which is flocking. It's applied by putting on a oil-based adhesive that's color matched to the flocking, and then blowing on a very fine chopped rayon fiber. And it adheres to the flocking adhesive and sets. The torturous part about it is that when you do it, you can't touch it for about a day. So now you have this beautiful fluffy thing that you want to rub and touch, And you're not allowed to, much like the art in the gallery. So if you'd like to feel what flocking feels like, there's a piece over here. Rub it, touch it, dig your nails into it, do whatever you need to do, but please get it out of your system. I refer to the people that touch work as the art fondlers. You know who you are, but it's all right. So anyways, this was a recent piece. The chair is vintage, and just trying to touch back to childhood. You know, I was a child of the 60s, born in 65, so I had bell-bottom jeans, and I wore stripes and plaids together, and all those things our mothers did to us when we were little. And so, you know, back then there was a different type of home decoration, paneling, brass, tchotchkes, hummels, you know, everything from, remember the mushroom canisters, you know, all that kind of stuff. Well, now those molds are hanging out in dumps or in the back of buildings. And what I've done is I've taken those molds and I use them as press molds. So I'm not pouring liquid clay in there to cast a true reproduction of it. I'm pressing in, and I often leave the flange because I don't believe I'm deceiving anybody that I'm trying to faithfully reproduce that object. And the flange has become kind of a funny conversation that I've had over the years. People see it as everything from an aura to some sort of supernatural emanation, you know, all kinds of things. To me, it's just, I like the texture of it. I like the uniqueness of it. I like to see the little keys that were in the mold, and you know, they're not perfect. There's holes or slits and bubbles. The point is, even though you see my hand in what I'm making, you still understand what it is by looking at it. It's still a Hubble child, or you know, whatever the case may be. So let's move over this way. Another recent piece by the title of Zephyr, and this is a good example of where the mold has inspired the piece. So we were talking a little bit about, you know, do you name the piece, do you name it and then back into the object, or do you make the object and then decide on the title? So I had this mold of this little girl here who's got this windswept dress. And I thought, you know, she's in action, she's in motion, there's something happening. And so it slowly came on that I designed the piece, you know, where the wind is blowing, the dress is swept. And then I liked the shadow so much, I thought, I'm going to put a vinyl disc behind it just to give it a background. It's almost like a frame or a partial frame, but I think it gives it depth. And then playing with the glazes. So we have a satin glaze, a glossy glaze, this kind of rusty glaze, and then on the side these are Chinese ceramic decals. So they're liquid, they're powdered glass that's printed on a sheet. You can find these patterns that go back hundreds of years because they've changed very little once they have a pattern. If you remember the old Dutch blue and white plates like the Delft, the Chinese used to replicate that with a decal pattern, the arabesques and stuff, and they haven't changed since the 1600s. So, and then on the front I flocked it. So again, playing with texture, we have matte, satin, glossy, pattern, fuzzy, you know, just trying to mix it up and give more of a an all-around visual, tactile kind of experience. And I'm particularly fond of this piece. I just think that you really feel like she's in the wind, you know, it's really moving through her. So, and then this base, I made the mold for this base, and I did something kind of interesting. If anybody knows how they make crown molding in houses, where it's plaster the old way, so what they would do is they would mix plaster, really heavy mixture. I think there was other additives in there, sometimes horsehair and things. And then the man would have a guide that was the profile of this on a board, and he would scree it across the roof or the ceiling, dragging it to make that pattern. And so that's what I did with a piece of clay. I made a profile off of some plywood, put a big block of clay and just kept scraping on it until it created the contour I wanted, and then I cut it off and then made the mold. So the thing about ceramic and me not being classically trained is everything's a discovery. Everything is a aha moment. You know, I have them daily and it's usually because I've boxed myself into a problem that I didn't even know existed until it happened. And now I have to figure it out or lose the piece, so we work it out. So that's where that piece came from. The ravens of the children of the marsh, the maidens of the marsh. This was actually from a series that I did that was called 10 Thoughts on Tuesday. And originally what I had devised for myself was that every Tuesday I would make a new sculpture. Every sculpture had the same base. And this is press molded, so it's not poured. I would take clay and shove it on the inside of the mold and join the pieces together. And then when I get plaster molds, a lot of these are from the 60s and 70s, and there are a lot of ducks in those molds. An exorbitant amount of ducks. And so I always get doubles and triples and quadruples, and you know, I'm always trying to farm the other ones out. But so that's where this kind of came from. But then when it was all set together, the name was really difficult. I don't know why it was, because now the name is perfectly great. But sometimes I dive a little too deep into mythology and lore. And when I was in France, I was visiting a friend who lives there. And we were on the Seine, and at the mouth of the Seine there is a Roman statue of a goddess in a little niche, and her name is Sequana, and she's the goddess of the Seine, the Roman goddess of the Seine, and it's still there. And her avatar, or her conveyance, is a duck. She rides on the back of a duck. And so that always resonated with me, and the original name of this was Sequana's Children. But for somebody walking by and looking at a piece, they don't know what a Sequana is, and for me to explain it and go through it, it just kind of loses its luster. You know, they're like, I'm reaching too hard. So we were talking about names that you had to change, and I had to change this piece because the gallerist wouldn't show it because he hated the name.
That's how I feel.
It is, I know, but it really didn't bother me because it's a really long explanation for, you know, a simple duck sculpture. But that was why the ducks had the gold luster. And when you see gold on ceramic, most of the time, unless they're using a paint, it is actually 24 karat gold. And this process goes back to the Roman times, where they would mix powdered gold with tree resin, because it would adhere to the outside of the ceramic, and then when it was firing, it would flux and create a lustrous layer. And the cool thing about gold is if the bottom surface is matte, the gold will be matte. If the bottom surface is glossy, the gold will be glossy. So this is a secondary firing, though. You would bisque fire, then glaze fire, and then luster fire. So yeah, it adds another step. And usually it's not, like if it's on functional wear, it's not dishwasher safe, and it will do crazy things in the microwave, and so, but I don't think anybody's putting a pot roast on this, so we're probably all right. Let's go on to liminal trophies. How about that? So I need to take this off for a minute because my face is soaking wet. The title is Liminal Trophies, and the word liminal, or the state of liminality, is about being on the precipice of understanding. So when you are in a liminal state, you are neither what you were before you reach that state or what you will be after that state. Somebody explained it, I thought this was kind of a cool way, that if you were a nun and you were a novice, and you go to that rite where you become a proper nun, there is a moment of liminality where you are neither nor what you will be. So you weren't. It's a cool place, and I think that in general, art, or the experience of viewing art, is a liminal activity, where when you come into the gallery, when you came in today, didn't know what you were going to expect, didn't know what the pieces were. As you see the works, as we talk about it, you pass through a process of understanding. So you're going from a non-liminal state to a liminal state to something different after that, through that realization, if that makes sense. So with these, I wanted to kind of play with a couple things. Being a child of the 60s, wallpaper and paneling particularly were ever present in my life. And also being the son of a Northwoods hunter, deer heads were part of our lives. And my mother and my grandmother had tchotchkes, which are the birds. So this is kind of a amalgam of childhood, a playfulness, there's some absurdity to it, but I just love the fuzzy flocked bird figurines on the deer heads, and it just kind of embodies, when I talk with my family, friends about childhood, even though we all have had different childhoods and come from different places, different parents, different professions, whatever the case may be, if you're of a certain age, there's a certain common experience that still happened, because using all these pieces that I assemble like Legos, people will say, oh, my grandmother had one of those on the sink, or I remember there was a shelf that we weren't allowed to touch and it had one of those Hummel children on there, and that kind of thing. So a lot of the work deals with my own reminiscence of childhood, which was a pleasant childhood. I'm not digging any bones up or anything. It was just kind of a lost time now, because people don't decorate the way they did then. You don't go into somebody's home and find a pack of ceramic puppies and the mother in the corner of the room that you weren't allowed to play near, that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of the reality of things. So let's pivot over here to this piece. Another fascination of mine is words, and I love words that mean things that maybe don't exist in English or sound much more beautiful and elegant in another language. And so this piece is titled a contra, which means against the light. So imagine driving into the sun and there's an object in front of you. The object is black because the sun is so bright it's washing out any detail. And so that was what I was trying to capture there, was that the light behind the object and the glow that basically only turns it into a silhouette. And this again is I think 3 different molds that I kind of manipulated. So a tree and then 2 rock pieces. I think this was like a part of an ashtray. This was the base of something, and then this tree was an add-on to like some little scene. And then the black flocking is just so beautiful and kind of lustrous. So that was where that came from. The 2 pieces over there on the end, the stacked rocks, and then the 7 sins and 3 graces. Those are very reminiscent of my first work. My first work was a series of buildings, and they had ravens on them, and one of the ravens had a crown, and I called him Raven Rex. And so each piece was kind of a vignette in Raven Rex's, mythic life. But we were talking yesterday about these pieces, and One of the secrets to pieces of mine that have the bases like that is I write something on the inside of the box in the clay that you can't read even if you shine a light in there. And it says, today's the day everything will get better. Because I figure if anybody reads it, they've broken it. And so I thought I would just kind of, leave them with a parting gift, And I did it on a lot of pieces, and so I'm still waiting to get a call from somebody saying, I read this thing on the inside of it. I said, oh, you must have broken it. But,
Not about to break my
yeah. So, and it just, ceramic, I think, because it's so durable, there's ceramics that are from the Roman times. There's pottery from ancient cultures that are thousands of years old. And I look at ceramic because it's so hard and permanent in a way almost like jewelry. It goes on to have a life of its own, and it can last hundreds or thousands of years. You have no idea how long it's going to last, but you're kind of sending it off into the universe and letting it, find its home. And if they could talk, the experiences that they have, the things that they are witness to silently. So with working on all these pieces I've shown you up till now are all stoneware. And stoneware is a relatively forgiving medium. It has something in it called grog. Grog are these particles that allow the stoneware to be more durable, more plastic. And it keeps them from cracking. Not always, it still cracks, but for the most part, it's a lot more forgiving. But I learned a lot of lessons, a lot of hard lessons. You can do everything right. You can make it, you can dry it, you can carefully bisque it, you can put the glaze on it, and then it gets to the final firing, and everything can go wrong. And so it's kind of like Christmas Day. Either you're getting a bag of coal or you're getting the present you always wanted. And it teaches you a lot as a person, but it also teaches you the craft. And so from there, I've recently been exploring porcelain. So this is a mid-fire white porcelain called White Lightning, which sounds pretty sassy, but it's a great material, and these are incredibly thin for me. I'm used to something that's 1/4 of an inch. But if we pick one up, we hold it to the light, you can see the light shining through it. So it's much like bone china. The bases are hollow, very thin, and they're, with the exception of this piece, all of the color is mixed into the clay. There's no glaze. So these are mason stains that are mixed into the porcelain ahead of time before I do them. I'll talk about, some of them have stories, some do not. Sometimes we make things for the joy of making, so fungus on a tree, the story is there's fungus on that tree. So this one, I think I was watching too much Netflix, and the story behind this is Odin, the god of the Vikings, had two ravens, Hunin and Munin, which were thought and memory. And so they are literally his omnipresence in the land. So they see everything, they are everywhere. And if you think even about like Michigan or from the UP, ravens are everywhere. They're constantly around. And so it seemed like a logical thing that if they were trying to ascertain what spiritual powers they had, that they were kind of watching and listening and remembering what's going on and reporting back to the big guy in Valhalla. So that's what that one is. And then below this is like a Celtic or a Pictic knot on there. And this, funny enough, is a chess piece from a Viking chess set. So I worked it in like a stone. This one, with the light coming down in it, this is called Susie Would Rather Listen to the Trees. And I had a good friend who passed away recently. And early on in my art career, I was looking for inspiration. And I was doing something that I called childhood shelves, which was stacking of objects, like playing like a child with objects and trying to tell a story. And she told me a bunch of different stories, but this one really stuck, that when there was a house full of people as a little girl at a holiday, and it got loud and frenetic, and she was quite an introvert, she would quietly leave the house and walk out into the woods and sit by her favorite tree and listen to the wind blow through the trees, because she would much rather listen to the trees than the people. And so then her mother would find her, bring her back into the house. So I've done a version of this in numerous ways, and it's also here in Solitude. You can see Susie sitting on her chair. This is kind of my pandemic piece, where, kind of feeling closed in with the world as it was, but we're better now. This one is kind of a take on the Susie would rather listen to the tree. So inside, the inside of the tree is textured with a leaf pattern. And then I used mason stains for the chair and the raven. The chair is a mold from a 1950s dollhouse plastic pressed mold. I made the mold. And what was the official name of this? I'm forgetting. The raven seat. And so my thought was that maybe in my secret forest there's a hollow giant tree that has a chair in it that you go and sit, and the raven comes and tells you secrets of the world. Or you could tell him your secrets and get it off your back. So whatever works for you. He's an equal opportunity raven. And let's see, did I have that one, that one, that one? And then I think the other one we'll talk about is this, the fairy ring. The little mushrooms around the tree reminds me of fairy rings that grow, in the grass. And of course the lore of that is that you should never enter a fairy ring, because you'll be swept off to the land of Fae, and if you eat anything there, you're doomed to stay there for the rest of your life. And if you come back, it may be years later, because time runs differently there. So I was always fascinated by that stuff. And as a child, I always jumped into the fairy ring, and alas, no magical repercussions. I know, and now I do this, right? Why don't we follow around to the other side? Come on over here. After the talk, I'll be happy to, talk about anything and answer questions individually. You guys can just file in here. Let me come on the end, and you guys can look at the work while I talk. Come on in. So we have a couple pieces here I thought I'd talk about. So there you see that same pattern again, that Chinese, the Chinese decal. That's the same one that's on the other one, except it's glazed over the top. And
Chinese decal, we missed that.
oh, that's okay. A Chinese decal is a powdered glass that they mix with a medium and they silk screen it on paper. And then what you do is sometimes on wet clay, sometimes on bisque fired clay, which means it's been fired once but not fully.
Right.
You lay that on there, and with water it releases and prints onto the thing.
Like a transfer.
It's a transfer. And these patterns are hundreds of years old. They haven't changed in hundreds of years. You can go back and find, there are new contemporary patterns, but there are quite a few very old ones, and that's a chrysanthemum pattern. And the birds are just various birds. It looks like a box and it opens, but it does not. It's just a sculpture. Cool. Yeah. Then over here we have George's Three Ways. I came across a George Washington mold, and I thought, what a weird thing to have. Like, who really needs a bust of George Washington? And so it sat around for a long time, and I just started exploring this scaffolding, and I did a number of pieces with the wood-looking scaffolding, and it just kind of evolved. I think I did the middle one first, and then I thought, well, it kind of needs one on the side, and then it needs maybe a friend over here, and it just evolved. And it's a black satin amical glaze, and that's stoneware. So, yeah, and with this piece, it's one of those that was really just from the joy of making. I wasn't trying to say anything. I'm not, curing anybody's problems. I'm just enjoying myself. I'm making for myself, really. You do. And this piece is really a self-portrait in a lot of ways, and it is kind of my ceramic journey. So in the middle, you see the little boy figure on top of a stack of the same little boy figure. And that's kind of how I feel about learning to do ceramic. You fail, and you fail, and you fail, and you fail, and you fail again, and then you get a tiny little success, and then you fail 5 more times. And it's just, you have to learn, you have to be open to the failure as the teacher. So it's a very Zen kind of concept, but it really does work. You really do get to a point where you can start forecasting how the material is going to work and how it's going to respond. And when it fails, you know why it failed, because you know you didn't do A, B, or C, or you tried to push it, And there's a lot of that in art anyways, trying to push the parameters and push the medium or the material. And I think the last one we're going to talk about is over here. You guys are fine. Oak flooring with, I think it was a drum mold, all these little characters. So before, when I talked about play, being a child and playing, this came from me literally playing on my childhood floor as a child I grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And we had a wood floor much like that. And I can vividly remember sitting on that with all my junk. And as a child, a rubber duck can be anything. It could be your sister, it could be your mom, it could be a teacher, it could be a bus. It's what you assign to it. And it's kind of something that I wish adults had the ability to let go of the labels of things and this precise order all the time, to allow yourself to be free and play and not be so rigid. And so with this, that's exactly what I did. I just played and stacked, and then in construction, I have to construct that on its back. Because when you make something like that and it's wet clay, if you try to dry it, it's all going to sink down like a souffle into the bottom. So you make it on your back. And one of the things that I learned when you're making things that hang is that, and I learned it the hard way, is you have to cut the holes first. So you make the back before you make anything else. And I also stamp and sign the back before the piece is ever completed. Because you will never be able to turn it over when it's wet to do all that stuff. So this is multiple process. So then we have to dry it very, very slowly so nothing cracks, because all those pieces were made attached to each other. And then afterwards, very carefully, you have to glaze all the pieces to the different colors, not touching the other one. So it's a lot like the game Operation, but it doesn't buzz, and it doesn't always let you know that it happened until after the firing, because then all of a sudden you got a spot on the side of the bunny that you didn't know was there, because the colors of the glazes when they're wet are nothing like the colors when they're fired. Right. And then after that, I flocked the piece, and I had to figure out how to create the base, or the backer, which is hung on a French cleat. So it's very easy to hang. It's not a complicated thing. There's 2 screws behind the ceramic that hold it, and then there's a French cleat behind that you just mount to the wall, level it, and hang it on there.
What's the wood?
The wood is oak. It's vintage oak flooring from my friend Pasqua's house in Escanaba. She had some in her rafters, and being a greedy artist, I said, "Do you need that?" And she's like, "No. Do you want it?" And I said, "Yes, please." And I fully expect sometime for her to have a water leak and come back to me and say, "Do you have any of that flooring left?" Because I think she gave me all of it. But, and then this piece over here, just a side note, is that the scaffolding, like the Georges, I did experiment with using it to spread 2 objects apart and hold them together. And I was telling Christy yesterday about or I think it was Christy, about that glaze is a chartreuse celadon. And I had another one from the same company that was a satin green, which was kind of this yucky, I don't know, it just was a mousy, uninteresting green, and I didn't like the surface of it. But the jars looked almost exactly the same. And so I made the piece, fire it, get the bisquing done, glaze the scaffolding, which is glazed and underglazed, and then I use a wash over that to give it a little bit of antiquing so you can see the texture. And then I glaze the two gnomes, and then I fire it after it's dry. So I'm all excited about this piece because it took me all this time to get there. And here was this pukey green satin, and I was so mad. And the thing with ceramic is when it's wrong, and it's wrong forever. There's not much you can do to it unless, yeah, I have heard about people sandblasting stuff, but it's kind of like, what's the point, you know? But I was really, 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 really mad, and I smashed it on the floor. And I wish I had. That would have been great. And somebody else in the house came running to the door, and they peeked my head in my studio, and I screamed some expletives at them to get out. And I promptly sat down to make another one. And here's the result, which I'm much more happy with. But yeah, so I think that's it. So thank you guys so much for coming to see us on this gloomy day, and please peruse the art. Thank you.
Is that little house